Tell me it's a lie, David. Lisa's voice barely carried over the roar of the rain, lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of his study. Alpha King David didn't flinch. He stood perfectly still, his broad back to her, watching the storm roll over the city. When he finally turned, his expression was unreadable, a mask of cold authority that had always thrilled her, until now. "I owe you no explanations, Lisa," he stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. The silence that followed was heavier than the thunder outside. She looked at the crumpled photograph in her trembling hand. David, caught in a heated embrace with Chloe. Chloe, her best friend's girlfriend. The betrayal tasted like ash. "You owe me everything," she whispered, before crossing the room, her hand raising in a sharp, blinding arc. The echo of the slap seemed to hang in the air long after the sound died away. A faint red mark bloomed on David's jawline, stark against his pale, chiseled features. For a terrifying second, his eyes flashed gold, the wolf rising to the surface, demanding submission. But Lisa didn't lower her gaze. She held it, her own eyes blazing with a fierce, human defiance that had always intrigued him. He didn't retaliate. He simply stood there, a towering figure of power and dominance, absorbing the blow. "Are you quite finished?" he asked, his tone chillingly calm. Lisa's hand stung, but the pain was nothing compared to the sickening knot in her stomach. She threw the photograph at his feet. It fluttered down like a dead leaf, landing face up. It was undeniable. The way his hands gripped Chloe's waist, the desperate tilt of Chloe's head. It wasn't a casual encounter. It was an affair, finished. Lisa scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "I'm just getting started. How long, David? How long have you been making a fool out of me, out of Mark?" Mark. The name hung between them, a heavy indictment. Mark was not just her best friend, he was David's Delta, one of his most trusted enforcers. To betray a pack member was a grievous offense. To betray a high-ranking officer was unthinkable, even for the Alpha King. David finally looked down at the photo, his expression tightening imperceptibly. "Things are not always as they seem, Lisa." "Don't you dare gaslight me," she yelled, the carefully constructed walls of her composure crumbling. "I know what I see. I smelled her on you 3 nights ago. I tried to convince myself it was just lingering scent from the pack meeting, but this..." She gestured wildly at the photo. "This is proof." He stepped closer, his imposing presence meant to intimidate. "You shouldn't be snooping in my private affairs." "Private affairs?" She stepped back, shaking her head in disbelief. "You are the Alpha King. Your private affairs affect the entire pack. What happens when Mark finds out what happens to the stability you claim to protect?" David's jaw clenched. "I will handle Mark. Handle him." Lisa felt a cold dread wash over her. "You sound like a mob boss, not an alpha. You're talking about destroying a man's life, a man who would die for you." "My responsibilities go far beyond simple loyalties," David countered, his voice hard. "There are political complexities you do not understand." "Political complexities." She let out another harsh laugh. "Sleeping with your Delta's girlfriend is political now. That's a new low, even for you." She turned away, grabbing her coat from the back of the leather armchair. She couldn't breathe in this room anymore. The air felt thick with lies and the suffocating weight of his authority. "Where are you going?" he demanded, a hint of genuine alarm finally breaking through his stoic facade. "Away from you," she said, not looking back. "I won't be a party to this, David. I won't stand by and watch you destroy people I care about." As she reached the heavy oak door, he spoke again, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You cannot leave, Lisa. You belong to me." She paused, her hand on the brass handle. She didn't turn around. "I belong to no one," she replied, her voice steady despite the trembling in her limbs. She opened the door and walked out into the storm, leaving the Alpha King standing alone in the wreckage of his own making. The rain was a cold shock to her system, instantly soaking through her thin coat. Lisa didn't care. The physical discomfort grounded her, pushing away the overwhelming urge to collapse and cry. She had to get to Mark before David did. She had to warn him. Her car was parked half a block away from David's penthouse. As she fumbled with her keys, a sleek black SUV pulled up alongside her. The tinted window rolled down, revealing the impassive face of Beta Marcus. "Get in, Lisa," Marcus said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Lisa froze, rain plastering her hair to her face. "I'm not going back up there, Marcus." "I'm not here to take you back up," he replied, unlocking the back door. "But you shouldn't be out here alone. The king is displeased." "He has no right to be," she shot back. But she climbed into the car anyway. She knew better than to argue with a beta on duty. The interior was warm, smelling faintly of leather and pine. Marcus pulled away from the curb smoothly. They drove in silence for a few minutes before he spoke again. "You shouldn't have slapped him," he said quietly, his eyes focused on the rain-slicked road. "He deserved worse," Lisa muttered, hugging her arms tightly around herself. "Perhaps," Marcus conceded. "But challenging an alpha in his own territory, especially a king, is dangerous." "I'm not afraid of him." "Then you are foolish," Marcus said bluntly. "He is not just a man, Lisa. He is power incarnate, and he is currently very volatile." "Volatile because I caught him cheating?" she demanded. Marcus sighed. "The situation is more complicated than a simple affair." "Don't give me that political complexities nonsense too," she warned. "It's a betrayal, plain and simple." "It is a betrayal, yes. But the reasons behind it..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "It's not my place to discuss. So you're just going to blindfold me and take me to a safe house?" she asked sarcastically. "I'm taking you to your apartment," Marcus corrected her. "And I suggest you pack a bag. You need to leave the city for a few days." Lisa's heart pounded. "Leave why? Because he's embarrassed." "Because he is angry," Marcus said, his voice dropping. "And when an alpha king is angry, it's best not to be in his line of sight." "I have to talk to Mark," she insisted. "Mark has been sent on an assignment to the Northern Territories," Marcus informed her. "He won't be back for a week." Lisa felt a cold wave of realization wash over her. "He orchestrated it. He sent Mark away so he could..." She couldn't finish the sentence. The sheer calculation of it was sickening. "As I said," Marcus repeated softly, "it is complicated." They pulled up to her apartment building. Marcus turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Go inside, pack a bag. I'll wait here and take you to the airport." Lisa opened the door, stepping back out into the rain. "I'm not running, Marcus. This is my home." "It's his territory," Marcus reminded her. "And you just challenged him in front of his inner circle." "I didn't see anyone else in that room," she pointed out. "We hear everything," Marcus said simply. Lisa slammed the door and hurried into her building, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. She had struck the king. She had challenged his authority. And now she was alone in his territory. She had to think fast, but as she reached her door, she saw it was slightly ajar. Someone was already inside. Lisa's breath hitched. She pushed the door open gently, stepping into the dimly lit hallway. The apartment was silent, save for the rhythmic drumming of rain against the window pane. She moved cautiously, her senses on high alert. The scent hit her immediately, a cloying mix of expensive perfume and nervous sweat. She rounded the corner into the living room and stopped short. Sitting on her sofa, looking entirely out of place in her modest apartment, was Chloe. "What are you doing here?" Lisa demanded, her voice tight with anger and a lingering trace of shock. Chloe jumped, spilling a drop of the wine she was holding onto the rug. She looked terrible. Her usually perfectly styled hair was disheveled, and her makeup was smudged under her eyes. "Lisa, thank God," Chloe breathed, standing up quickly. "I didn't know where else to go." "You came to my apartment after what you did." Lisa couldn't believe the audacity. "You don't understand," Chloe pleaded, taking a step toward her. "It's not what you think. Really, because it looked exactly like you were sleeping with David behind Mark's back," Lisa retorted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Is there a different interpretation I missed?" Chloe flinched. "It wasn't. I didn't want to." Lisa stared at her, anger momentarily giving way to confusion. "You didn't want to? What are you saying, Chloe? Did he force you?" The implication was horrifying, far worse than a simple affair. No, not like that," Chloe said quickly, shaking her head. "But I didn't have a choice." Lisa crossed her arms. "Explain." "Because right now, all I see is someone who betrayed her boyfriend and is trying to play the victim." Chloe sank back onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. "David threatened me," she mumbled through her fingers. Lisa's heart stopped. "Threatened you with what?" Chloe looked up, her eyes wide with genuine fear. "With Mark. He said if I didn't do what he wanted, he would send Mark on a mission he wouldn't return from." The room seemed to spin. Lisa sat down hard on the armchair opposite Chloe. David sending Mark to the Northern Territories. It wasn't just to get him out of the way. It was a warning. Why, Lisa asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why would he want you that badly?" Chloe hesitated, biting her lip nervously. "It wasn't about wanting me, Lisa. It was about controlling him. Controlling Mark." Lisa frowned. "Mark is already fiercely loyal to him." Mark was starting to ask questions, Chloe explained, her voice gaining a little more strength. "About the rogue attacks near the border. He thought David was ignoring them intentionally." Lisa knew about the rogue attacks. It had been a topic of hushed conversation among the pack for weeks. "And you think David was sleeping with you to keep Mark quiet?" "I know he was," Chloe said firmly. "He told me. He said Mark was becoming a liability, and he needed leverage. He used me as leverage." The pieces began to fall into place, forming an ugly, terrifying picture. David wasn't just a cheating partner. He was a manipulative tyrant willing to use anyone to maintain his power. "And the photograph?" Lisa asked, remembering the damning evidence. "How did I get that?" Chloe shook her head. "I don't know. Someone must have been watching us." "But Lisa, you have to believe me. I love Mark. I only did it to protect him." Lisa looked at the woman sitting across from her. She had never particularly liked Chloe, finding her superficial, but right now she only saw a pawn in a dangerous game. "Marcus is waiting outside," Lisa said suddenly, making a decision. "He told me to pack a bag and leave." Chloe's eyes widened in panic. "You can't go. If you leave, David will know you know something. He'll come after you. He already knows I know about the affair, Lisa pointed out. I slapped him. You did what Chloe gasped, looking horrified. Lisa, you're crazy. Maybe, Lisa admitted, but we can't stay here. We need to find Mark. But he's in the Northern Territories, Chloe said. It's a 2-day drive. Then we'd better get started, Lisa said, standing up. Grab your things. They moved quickly, throwing clothes and essentials into bags. As they headed for the door, Lisa hesitated. She looked out the window. Marcus's SUV was still there, idling in the rain. We can't go out the front, Lisa murmured. There's a fire escape in the back. It leads to the alley. They slipped out quietly, the rain providing cover for their escape. As they navigated the narrow, dark alleyway, Lisa felt a thrill of fear and adrenaline. She was running from the Alpha King, armed only with a terrified accomplice and a desperate plan to warn the man they both cared about. The game had changed, and she was no longer just a bystander. She was a target. The rain had finally stopped, leaving a heavy, damp chill in the air. The borrowed sedan, a nondescript gray thing Lisa had purchased for cash from a shady dealership on the outskirts of the city, hums unsteadily beneath them. Chloe sat in the passenger seat, staring blankly out the window as the sprawling urban landscape gave way to the dense, foreboding pines of the transition zone. They hadn't spoken much since their escape down the fire escape. Lisa's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white. She kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Beta Marcus's sleek, black SUV emerging from the morning fog. Do you think he knows we're gone? Chloe asked, her voice barely above a whisper, breaking the hours of tense silence. If he didn't check the apartment before he left, he probably knows by now. Lisa replied, keeping her eyes on the winding road. Marcus isn't an idiot. He's David's right hand for a reason. Chloe shuddered. What happens when he tells David I don't know? Lisa admitted. But I slapped the Alpha King and ran. That's not something he can just ignore without looking weak. We're going to die, Chloe whimpered, burying her face in her hands again. He's going to find us, and he's going to kill us. We are not going to die, Lisa said firmly, though her own heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. We are going to find Mark, warn him, and figure out a plan. A plan against an Alpha King. Chloe scoffed miserably. There is no plan against him, Lisa. He controls everything. The borders, the enforcers, the money. He doesn't control the Northern Territories, Lisa pointed out. They've always been independent, wild. If we can reach the border town of Pine Ridge, we might find some sympathizers. Chloe didn't look convinced. And what about Mark? What if he doesn't believe me? What if he thinks I'm just making this up to cover my tracks? Lisa glanced at her. It was a valid fear. Mark loved Chloe, but he was fiercely loyal to his king. We have the photograph, Lisa reminded her, though a cold knot of dread formed in her stomach. And we have your testimony about the threats. If Mark truly loves you, he'll listen. They drove on in silence for another hour, the trees growing taller and thicker, the sky remaining an oppressive, bruised purple. The radio crackled with static, the signal growing weaker the further north they traveled. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the car, followed by a violent shudder. The steering wheel jerked in Lisa's hands, and the car swerved sharply toward the ditch. Hold on, Lisa yelled, fighting to keep the vehicle on the road. She slammed on the brakes, the tires shrieking against the wet asphalt as they skidded to a halt mere inches from a steep drop-off. Chloe was hyperventilating. What happened? Are we being attacked? Lisa killed the engine and grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment. I don't know. Stay here and lock the doors. She stepped out into the freezing air, the silence of the forest pressing in around her. The only sound was the hiss of steam escaping from the engine block. She shone the flashlight on the front driver's side tire. It was completely shredded, the rim warped and dented. But it wasn't a simple blowout. Embedded in the remaining rubber were jagged shards of dark glass, caltrops. Someone had laid a trap. Lisa Chloe's voice trembled through the slightly open window. What is it? Lisa walked back to the window, her expression grim. We didn't just get a flat. Someone spiked the road. Chloe's eyes widened in horror. They found us. Maybe, Lisa said, scanning the dense tree line. Or maybe it's just scavengers. The roads out here are dangerous. What do we do? We changed the tire, Lisa said, though she felt a cold sweat breaking out on the back of her neck. And we do it fast. She opened the trunk and pulled out the spare and the jack. As she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The hairs on her arms stood on end, and the shadows between the trees seemed to shift and writhe. She had just finished tightening the lug nuts when a low growl resonated from the darkness. It was a sound that vibrated in her chest, primal and terrifying. Lisa froze, the tire iron slipping from her grasp. She slowly turned the flashlight toward the sound. 2 massive wolves emerged from the trees. They were larger than any she had ever seen, their fur a mottled, dirty gray, their eyes glowing an eerie, unnatural yellow in the beam of her light. They weren't pack wolves. They were rogues. And they were staring right at her. Lisa didn't scream. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her system, but instinct overrode it. She lunged for the car door, ripping it open just as the first wolf sprang. Its jaws snapped shut on empty air where her leg had been a split second before. Lisa slammed the door shut, hitting the lock with a trembling hand. "Drive," she yelled at Chloe, scrambling over the center console into the driver's seat. Chloe was frozen, staring wide-eyed at the snarling beast, now throwing its massive weight against the reinforced glass of the passenger window. The car rocked with the impact. "Chloe, snap out of it!" Lisa shouted, fumbling with the keys. Her hands shook so badly she dropped them onto the floorboard. The second wolf leaped onto the hood, its claws screeching against the metal as it scrambled for purchase. It stared at them through the windshield, its yellow eyes devoid of anything but savage hunger. Lisa ducked under the steering wheel, desperately searching for the keys. The sounds of snarling and scratching were deafening, magnified in the small enclosed space of the car. She found the keys, shoved them into the ignition, and twisted. The engine groaned, sputtered, and died. "No, no, no," Lisa chanted, trying again. The engine whined but refused to turn over. The stress of the sudden stop, or perhaps the cold, had killed the old battery. The wolf on the passenger side reared back and slammed its head against the window. A spiderweb crack appeared in the glass. Chloe finally screamed, a piercing, terrified sound that spurred Lisa into action. She reached into the back seat, grabbing the heavy metal tire iron she had thrown back there. It wasn't much against 2 massive rogue wolves, but it was all they had. "Get down!" Lisa ordered, rolling down her window just a fraction of an inch. She didn't have room to swing, but she could thrust. The wolf on the hood sensed the movement and lunged toward her window. As its snout pressed against the narrow opening, Lisa drove the pointed end of the tire iron upward with all her strength. She felt it connect, a sickening thud against bone and cartilage. The wolf let out a sharp yelp and scrambled backward, sliding off the hood and disappearing into the darkness. One down, but the other was still hammering against the passenger window. The crack was spreading, the glass beginning to bow inward. "We can't stay here," Lisa said, her voice tight. "The window is going to give." "Where do we go?" Chloe sobbed, curled into a ball on the seat. "We're in the middle of nowhere." "The woods," Lisa said. "We have to make a run for it. The trees are too dense for them to maneuver easily. We might have a chance." It was a terrible plan, but it was their only option. "On my count," Lisa instructed, gripping the tire iron tightly. "You open your door, I open mine. We run straight into the trees and don't stop. Don't look back." Chloe nodded weakly, her hand trembling on the door handle. "One," Lisa whispered. The wolf hit the window again. A small chunk of glass fell into the car. 2, 3, go. Lisa kicked her door open, throwing her weight against it. She stumbled out into the freezing rain, the tire iron raised defensively. Chloe followed a split second later, screaming as she bolted past the stunned wolf on her side of the car. They scrambled up the slick embankment and plunged into the dense forest. The darkness was absolute, the only light coming from the occasional flash of lightning illuminating the gnarled branches. Branches whipped their faces, and roots tore at their ankles. Lisa could hear the frantic pounding of her own heart, almost drowning out the sounds of pursuit. But not quite. Behind them, the sounds of snapping twigs and heavy breathing grew louder. The wolves were recovering, their superior senses tracking them through the night. "Keep going," Lisa urged, grabbing Chloe's hand when the other woman stumbled. "Don't stop." They ran until their lungs burned and their legs felt like lead. But the sounds behind them were only getting closer. The rogues were faster, stronger, and in their element. Suddenly, a loud howl tore through the night. But it wasn't the ragged, feral cry of a rogue. It was deeper, more resonant, a sound of absolute authority and power. The sounds of pursuit ceased abruptly. Lisa and Chloe stopped, panting heavily, huddled together behind the massive trunk of an ancient oak tree. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the chase. Then, out of the darkness, a figure emerged. Not a wolf, but a man. He was tall and broad-shouldered, moving with a fluid, predatory grace despite the rough terrain. As he stepped into a patch of moonlight, Lisa's heart plummeted. It wasn't David. It was worse. "Well, well," Beta Marcus said, his voice smooth and deadly calm. "Looks like you two managed to get yourselves into a bit of trouble." Marcus didn't look like a man who had just chased 2 women through a freezing forest. His dark suit was immaculate, his breathing even. He stood a few yards away, hands clasped loosely behind his back, exuding a quiet, terrifying control. "How did you find us?" Lisa demanded, stepping slightly in front of Chloe, her grip tightening on the tire iron. Marcus raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement crossing his features. "You bought a car with a tracking device hidden in the undercarriage, Lisa. You're resourceful, I'll give you that. But you lack experience." Lisa cursed internally. Of course. A shady dealership near the pack borders would definitely monitor its sales. "Did you bring those?" she asked, gesturing vaguely toward the darkness where the rogues had been. "The rogues, no," Marcus replied, his tone chillingly casual. "They are an unfortunate symptom of a larger problem. A problem the Alpha King is currently trying to solve." By sleeping with his enforcer's girlfriend, Lisa shot back, unable to stop the venom in her voice. Marcus sighed, a sound of genuine weariness. "You view everything through such a narrow lens, Lisa. You see a betrayal? David sees a necessary evil to maintain order." Order. Chloe finally spoke up, her voice trembling but surprisingly loud. He threatened to kill Mark if I didn't comply. How is that order? Marcus's gaze shifted to Chloe, his expression unreadable. The king did what he felt was necessary to neutralize a growing threat without resorting to outright bloodshed. Mark isn't a threat, Lysa argued. He's the most loyal man in the pack. Loyalty is a fragile thing when faced with difficult truths, Marcus countered. Mark was beginning to uncover things he shouldn't. Things regarding the rogues, the border skirmishes. He paused, choosing his words carefully. David couldn't risk a schism within the pack. He needed leverage to ensure Mark's continued cooperation. So he used me, Chloe said bitterly. He used the situation, Marcus corrected smoothly. It was unfortunate, but effective. Lysa stared at the beta, appalled by his cold logic. You're just as twisted as he is. You justify his monstrosities because you're too cowardly to stand up to him. Marcus didn't rise to the bait. I am loyal to the crown, Lysa, because without the crown, the pack falls. And if the pack falls, we all die. The rogues you just encountered. They are a mere fraction of what waits beyond our borders. David understands the burden of leadership. You understand only your own bruised ego. He took a step forward, extending a hand. Now, enough of this foolishness. You will both return with me. The king is waiting. We're not going anywhere with you, Lysa stated, raising the tire iron defensively. Marcus let out a short, humorless laugh. Do you really think you can fight me, Lysa? I am the beta. I could snap that piece of metal and your arm before you even swing. Maybe, she conceded. But you'd have to catch me first. Before Marcus could react, Lysa threw the heavy tire iron directly at his face. It was a desperate move, and she didn't expect it to hit, but it served its purpose. Marcus deflected it with a casual swipe of his arm, but the split-second distraction was all Lysa needed. Run! She yelled at Chloe, shoving her back into the dense undergrowth. They bolted again, deeper into the forest, scrambling over fallen logs and pushing through thorny bushes. The darkness swallowed them whole. Lysa expected to hear Marcus bounding after them, to feel his hands grabbing her shoulders, pulling her down. But there was only silence behind them. They ran until they physically couldn't anymore, collapsing near a small, trickling stream. Chloe was sobbing quietly, her clothes torn and mud-stained. Why didn't he follow us? Chloe gasped between sobs. Lysa stared back the way they came, her mind racing. I don't know. Maybe he couldn't track us in the dark without shifting, and shifting would alert the rogues. Or maybe... A new voice echoed from the shadows across the stream, deep and gravelly. He didn't have to. Lysa jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. A man stepped out from behind a large boulder. He was massive, easily as tall as David, but built thicker, with a rugged, untamed appearance. He wore worn leather and denim, and his eyes were the same unsettling yellow as the wolves they had encountered earlier. But this wasn't a feral beast. This was a man who radiated an intense, wild energy that made Lysa's skin prickle. Who are you? Lysa demanded, trying to keep the terror out of her voice. The man smiled, a slow, predatory grin that revealed slightly pointed canines. I am the reason your Alpha King is so desperate for control, he said. I am Silas, and you two just wandered right into my territory. Lysa realized with sickening clarity that they hadn't escaped danger. They had just traded one predator for another. They had run straight into the arms of the rogue leader. Silas didn't move to attack. He simply stood there, an immovable mountain of muscle and worn leather, watching Lisa's white-knuckled grip on the tire iron. The two massive wolves that had chased them through the woods emerged from the tree line, flanking him. Up close, they didn't look feral. They looked disciplined, sitting sharply on their haunches at a subtle flick of Silas's wrist. "You can put the metal stick down, sweetheart," Silas rumbled, his voice lacking the polished arrogance of David's court. "If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't have made it past the ridge." "Don't call me sweetheart," Lisa snapped, though her arms ached so badly she let the iron lower an inch. "And forgive me if I don't trust the man whose pets just tried to turn us into dinner." A low chuckle vibrated in Silas's chest. "They weren't hunting you. They were herding you. Away from Marcus. You're welcome, by the way." Chloe peeked out from behind Lisa's shoulder, her teeth chattering. "Herding us why? Because your piece is on a board," Silas replied, his yellow eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "And right now, David is moving his knights to protect his king. I prefer to intercept." He turned on his heel, gesturing over his broad shoulder. "Follow me, or stay here and freeze. Marcus is pragmatic, but he isn't patient. He'll find a way across the stream soon enough." Lisa exchanged a desperate look with Chloe. They were exhausted, freezing, and entirely out of their depth. With a heavy sigh, Lisa dropped the tire iron. It hit the muddy ground with a dull thud. They followed Silas deeper into the ravine, the terrain growing steeper and rockier until the trees parted to reveal a hidden expanse. Lisa stopped in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. She had expected a squalid camp of bloodthirsty savages. Instead, nestled in a massive natural cavern lit by crackling fire pits, was a village. There were tents, yes, but also sturdy wooden cabins built directly into the rock face. Women tended fires, men sharpened tools, and children chased each other through the shadows. This isn't a rogue camp," Lisa whispered, her worldview tilting violently. "Rogue is a word invented by kings to criminalize anyone who refuses to kneel," Silas said quietly, stopping beside her to look down at the settlement. "These are families. People who couldn't pay David's exorbitant border taxes. Wolves who refused to be drafted into his endless, pointless skirmishes to expand his territory. We are refugees, Lisa." "How do you know my name?" she asked, a cold spike of alarm shooting through her. "Because a king's bruised ego is loud," Silas said, turning to face her. "But also because someone here has been expecting you." Silas nodded toward the largest fire at the center of the cavern. A figure was sitting on a carved log, his back to them, stoking the flames. He wore standard issue enforcer tactical gear, though it looked battered and travel-stained. Chloe let out a strangled, breathless sob. The figure turned at the sound. His face was unshaven, shadows carving deep hollows under his eyes. But his posture was unmistakable. "Mark," Lisa breathed. "Chloe." Mark stood up, his expression a chaotic mix of disbelief, hope, and agonizing dread. He didn't look like a man on a royal mission. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. Chloe didn't hesitate. She scrambled down the rocky path, practically throwing herself into Mark's arms. He caught her, burying his face in her muddy hair, his massive shoulders trembling. Lisa walked down slowly, her eyes darting between Silas, who had followed at a leisurely pace, and her best friend. "You're not on a mission," Lisa stated as she approached the fire. Mark pulled back from Chloe just enough to look at Lisa. His jaw tightened. "I was sent to hunt the rogue leader, to eliminate the threat Silas posed." He looked over at the towering rebel. "Instead, I found the truth. The border skirmishes," Lisa realized aloud, remembering her argument with Marcus in the car. "They weren't rogue attacks. No. Mark said bitterly. They were Black Ops raids ordered by David himself, disguised to look like rogue violence. He needed an external enemy to justify tightening his grip on the packs, to increase his military spending, and to keep us all too afraid to question him. And when I found the supply manifests tying the attacks back to the royal treasury, he knew I was getting close. Mark continued, his voice cracking. He looked down at Chloe, his thumbs gently wiping the mud and tears from her cheeks. I just didn't realize how far he would go to keep me quiet. Chloe whimpered, pulling away slightly, her eyes dropping to the ground. Mark, there's something you need to know. About why we're here. About David. Lisa stepped back, letting the firelight cast long shadows. The real storm hadn't even begun. The fire popped loudly, sending a shower of orange sparks into the cavern's ceiling. For 10 agonizing minutes, Chloe spoke. She didn't spare herself. She confessed to the late-night summons, the terrifying, velvet-wrapped threats against Mark's life, and the ultimate, humiliating submission to the Alpha King's demands. Through it all, Mark stood rigid. His scent, usually a comforting blend of cedar and rain, soured with a metallic tang of pure, unadulterated rage. When Chloe finally finished, collapsing into harsh, jagged sobs, silence descended on the camp. Even the children had stopped playing, sensing the volatile energy radiating from the Delta Enforcer. "He touched you," Mark whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of profound, world-shattering horror. "He said he would send you to the Vanguard," Chloe choked out, falling to her knees in the dirt. "The suicide squads." "Mark, I was so scared. I'm so sorry." Mark looked at Lisa. "And you?" "I caught them," Lisa said, her voice remarkably steady despite the adrenaline shaking her core. "I took a picture. I confronted him in his study." A dark, dangerous shadow passed over Mark's eyes. And she slapped the king across his arrogant jaw and walked out the front door, Silas provided from the shadows, stepping into the firelight with a look of grim respect. News travels fast on the encrypted frequencies. The whole royal guard is in an uproar. A human female struck the Alpha King and lived. Mark let out a breath that sounded like a dry sob. He looked down at Chloe, kneeling in the dirt. Slowly, he reached down, gripping her elbows, and pulled her to her feet. He didn't pull her into a hug, but he didn't push her away either. His eyes were completely black, his wolf fighting for control. "This is pack law," Mark said, his voice dropping an octave, resonating with a terrifying, primal resonance. "To touch the mate of a sworn brother, it is an act of war. He has broken the covenant." "He broke it a long time ago, Mark," Silas said gently. "You just finally opened your eyes to it." "What do we do?" Lisa asked, stepping closer to Mark. She needed her best friend focused. "Marcus knows we came north. He tracks us. He'll bring an army." "Marcus is a dog on a leash," Mark snarled, pacing in front of the fire. "But he is loyal to the crown, not the man wearing it. The enforcers follow the law. If I present the evidence, the supply manifests proving the false flags, and the proof of his violation of pack law with Chloe, the guard will turn on him. It's a huge risk," Silas warned. "If you fail, it's not just treason. It's an execution." "It's the only way," Lisa interrupted. "David rules through fear and an illusion of honor. If you strip away the honor, the fear won't hold." A sudden, sharp howl echoed through the cavern, silencing the crackling fires. It wasn't a wolf howl. It was a high-pitched, electronic siren. The perimeter alarms, Silas's head snapped toward the cave entrance. "They're here." Already Chloe shrieked, pressing her hands over her ears. "Marcus doesn't sleep." Silas grunted, pulling a heavy radio from his belt. He clicked it twice. "Report." A frantic voice crackled through the static. "Silas, it's the Eastern Ridge. We have multiple vehicles, heavy armor." But Silas, it's not just Marcus. Silas's jaw clenched. Who is it the royal banner is flying? The Alpha King is here. He marched north himself. The air in the cavern seemed to vanish. David had come. The man who never left his glass tower in the city had dragged his royal guard into the mud of the transition zone to hunt down a single woman who dared to strike him. Mark drew a heavy sidearm from his thigh holster, racking the slide with a metallic clack that echoed ominously. "Good. Saves us the trip." "No," Lisa said, stepping in front of Mark. "If you go out there guns blazing, you validate his lie. You become the rogue he claims you are. They will slaughter this entire camp." "Then what do you suggest?" Lisa, Mark demanded, his eyes blazing. "Ask him nicely to step down." "No," Lisa said, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She reached into her coat pocket, her fingers brushing the cold, crumpled surface of the photograph. "We give him exactly what he wants. Me." The dawn broke gray and weeping, coating the forest in a miserable mix of freezing rain and sleet. The eastern ridge overlooked the cavern entrance, creating a natural amphitheater of jagged stone and dead pines. Alpha King David stood at the precipice, wrapped in a heavy, fur-lined trench coat. He looked every inch a monarch, radiating a suffocating aura of dominance. Behind him stood 50 royal enforcers, heavily armed, their faces obscured by tactical masks. Beta Marcus stood at his right hand, his expression unreadable. From the tree line below, 3 figures emerged. Lisa walked in the center, flanked by Mark and Silas. Chloe had remained in the cavern, hidden away with the children. David's golden eyes zeroed in on Lisa. The faint red bruise on his jawline was still visible. "Delta Mark," David called out, his voice magically amplified by the acoustics of the ridge. "You are fraternizing with a known terrorist. Step away from him, apprehend the human woman, and your treason may be overlooked." Mark didn't flinch. He planted his boots in the mud, staring up at his king. "I am standing next to a refugee, David. And I am protecting the woman who uncovered your rot." A murmur rippled through the ranks of the enforcers. It was unheard of for a Delta to speak to the king without using his title. David's lip curled into a sneer. "You have been poisoned by rogue lies. Marcus, execute the rebel. Bring the woman to me." Marcus stepped forward, his hand dropping to the hilt of his blade. But Lisa didn't let him draw it. "Wait," Lisa shouted, her voice cutting through the freezing air. She didn't speak to David. She looked directly at the 50 enforcers standing behind him. "You took an oath to protect the pack, to uphold the covenant." "Silence her," David ordered, a sudden edge of panic bleeding into his authoritative tone. But Marcus paused. He looked at Lisa, then at David. "Let her speak, sire. She is unarmed." David glared at his beta, but forcing the issue would show weakness. He ground his teeth, remaining silent. Lisa pulled the crumpled photograph from her pocket, holding it up as high as she could. "Your king claims to protect you. But he sent Delta Mark away on a suicide mission so he could force himself on Mark's mate." The murmur among the guards grew into a shocked rumble. Pack law was sacred. A mate was untouchable. "Lies and forgeries," David spat. "A desperate attempt by a jealous human, is it?" Mark roared, pulling a thick stack of folded papers from his jacket. "I have the treasury manifests. Signed by your hand, David. The rogue attacks on the border, you funded them. You armed mercenaries to kill our own people just so you could declare martial law and raise taxes. He threw the papers into the wind. They scattered like dead leaves, blowing up the ridge toward the enforcers. A few guards in the front row instinctively stepped forward, catching the fluttering pages, their eyes scanning the royal seals and monetary transfers. Treason! David bellowed, his eyes flashing brilliant, blinding gold. The air pressure dropped violently as he unleashed his alpha aura, attempting to force everyone to their knees. Lisa gasped, feeling an invisible weight pressed down on her shoulders. But Mark and Silas stepped in front of her, shielding her with their own formidable auras. "Look at him," Lisa yelled, fighting against the crushing pressure. "He doesn't want loyalty. He wants submission. He will sacrifice any of you to keep his throne." "Guards," David roared. "Kill them, all of them." He waited for the sound of weapons raising, for the thunder of boots charging down the hill. Instead, there was silence. David turned around. The 50 enforcers stood perfectly still. Several of them were looking at the papers in their hands. The captain of the guard, a scarred veteran named Elias, slowly lowered his rifle. "Elias," David snarled. "That is an order." "My oath is to the pack, sire," Elias said, his voice heavy with sorrow and disgust. "Not to a man who breaks the covenant and murders his own." Elias unclipped his royal insignia from his chest and dropped it into the mud. One by one, the clatter of metal hitting the rocks echoed through the valley as the rest of the enforcers followed suit. Even Marcus, standing closest to the king, slowly reached up and unpinned his beta badge. He didn't drop it. He placed it gently on a nearby rock. "Marcus," David whispered, his domineering aura shattering like fragile glass. "I told you, David," Marcus said softly. "Without the crown, the pack falls. You have tainted the crown. You are no longer fit to wear it." David stood alone on the ridge. The terrifying, omnipotent Alpha King was suddenly just a man in a coat. Shivering in the freezing rain, he looked down at Lisa. There was no fury left in his eyes, only a hollow, terrifying emptiness. He had lost his army. He had lost his beta. He had lost his throne. Without another word, David turned and walked away into the trees, disappearing into the mist. He wasn't chased. He was simply exiled, a ghost in the territory he once ruled. Mark turned to Lisa, his shoulders sagging as the adrenaline left him. He pulled her into a tight, crushing hug. "You did it," he whispered into her hair. "You actually broke him." Lisa rested her chin on her best friend's shoulder, looking past him at Silas, who was giving her a slow, respectful nod. She rubbed her hand, the ghost of the slap still tingling in her palm. "No," Lisa said softly, watching the dawn finally break through the heavy clouds. "He broke himself. I just handed him the mirror." The storm eventually passed, leaving the northern territories bathed in the stark, cleansing light of a new morning. The pack was forever changed, the illusion of tyranny shattered by the courage of a woman who refused to look the other way. Lisa didn't just leave a red mark on an Alpha King's face. She dismantled an empire with nothing but the truth and her own unyielding defiance. Her road ahead was uncertain, but as she stood by her chosen family, she finally felt free. If you felt your pulse pound during Lisa's